Monsieur le ministre, Monsieur le maire, Madame le ministre d'État, chers amis, bienvenue à la deuxième conférence internationale des villes amies des aînés. Mais désolé, c'est la limite de mon français. Je pense que c'est mieux si je parle maintenant en anglais. I'm staying at the Lowe's Hotel, and this morning when I had breakfast, I went to the top floor of the hotel, and they have one of those rotating restaurants. And I sat at 7 o'clock looking out across the whole of Quebec. What a magnificent city.
Yeah, that's good.
And it also gave me great pride to think that this is one of the 145 cities around the world that are members of the WHO Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities. It is a wonderful thing, and the commitment of Quebec, not just to this conference, but to their older population, is truly remarkable. But I think it's special that we meet here not just because of the commitment of Quebec. I think in many ways the Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities has its roots here in Canada, and particularly in Quebec. As you've heard, when the idea first arose of an age-friendly city from my predecessor, Alex Kalache, it was the Public Health Agency of Canada which provided resources and Louise Plouffe to ensure that that idea could become something tangible. And it was also the Public Health Agency of Canada that allowed us to review through Verena Manek how sustainable that initiative was. And when we look back after the initial burst of enthusiasm, one of the things that concerned us was that so few of the participating cities in the early stages were still doing something about their older people. In fact, of the original 33 cities, only 5 were still doing something several years later. And so at that point, we again turned to Quebec and looked at the model here for the network that has been established to help guide us globally to try and develop a network that would also inspire people to action. We wanted to move people from assessment to implementation. And the model here in Canada was in Quebec, was a great inspiration to us in developing the system which we now have put in place globally. If I can go to the first slide. And what a success it has been, how the baby has grown. This is a map today of the Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities. We have 145 cities around the world participating individually. We have 22 countries participating in 11 affiliated programs. And this, if anything, is an understatement. You can see that on this map there is no colour for Brazil, but in fact there's a lot of initiatives now happening, particularly in Sao Paulo with Alex. There's no colour for Iran, but we will hear later in the conference from the city of Tehran that they are also making moves in these directions. And you will only see one dot in China, Qiqihar in northern China, but in fact there is a national program of age-friendly cities happening in China as well. And so all in all, this global movement now includes cities that have made commitment to make their environment a better place for older people, with responsibility for close or probably over 100 million people. This is an enormous success. But I think we have come to a critical juncture in the growth of this network. And I think one of the things we're looking to for this conference is to provide some guidance and some vision for how we can move forward. One of the things I think we need to talk about is how do we make this a real network? How do we, the idea was always that this would never be an initiative that was driven by WHO, where we told cities what to do. Our role is to provide the platform for cities to communicate and to share their experiences and their learning. And we have to now move to making that real. We have to make the discourse between a city in China, a city in Quebec, a city in Brazil. We have to make that a real discourse. And so I think as you wander around the sessions over the next few days, I would like you to be thinking about how that might be made possible. Another challenge that confronts us in doing that is we are a very multicultural and multilingual community. And here we have difficulties even talking in 2 languages. But we have many languages around the world in cities participating. And we need to think about how we can bring those together and also how we can build on the strengths of those communities. And so, for example, one of the really exciting initiatives I find is the Francophone network of age-friendly cities, of which Quebec is a very active participant. And I also think we need to look at how we become an innovative network. It's not time to rest on our laurels. It's not time to sit back and say, we've done a good job, we've got it right, now let's be happy. Now is the time to actually think about how can we think more broadly, how can we draw into our networks urban planners, architects, designers. How can we make them be thinking about the issues which we know are so important? And to give you a very brief idea of some of the ways we might be moving to achieve these things, I've got 4 very quick points to make about how at WHO we will be moving forward. First of all, until now, the global network has essentially been run out of our head office in Geneva. But WHO is a vast organisation. We have 6 regional offices and 194 member states. And we are now exploring how we can engage all those levels of the organisation to make sure that this is a success. And one of the key levels is our regional offices, and I'm very pleased that a number of the focal points from our regional offices are here today, because I think that will be one of the drivers of how we move forward. And as an example of how that's happening in Europe, we managed to secure some funding from the European Union of 600,000 euros to try and build a European network that takes account of the local the special things that are different about Europe, but also that connects it to the rest of the world. The next way we can look forward is using electronics, using IT. And we have created this platform, agefriendlyworld.org. Until now, it's been a work in progress, but when you go home after this conference, please log on, because this will be a vehicle where people can talk to each other. It will translate automatically. Okay, it's Google Translate, and some of the translations may be interesting, but it is a vehicle for all of us to start talking to each other and also to communicate what we're doing to the rest of the world. So those of you who are leading communities or cities, please make sure that the space on that site for you and your community is filled in so the rest of the world can learn what we're doing. Thirdly, we have always thought that the way to stimulate innovation is through building communities of practice. Again, it's not something that WHO can tell the world what to do, but there's so much experience, so much innovation, so much vision out in the different cities and communities. We want to pull them together in using the idea of a community of practice where we might have 10 or 15 people from around the world focusing on a particular issue and trying to come up with some models of how it can move forward. And we have had 2 so far that have been successful, one focusing on rural and remote communities that was based here in Canada, and another one looking now at indicators for age-friendly cities. And I'm very pleased to announce here today that the Canadian International Development Agency, CEDA, has provided another $40,000 for us to launch a 3rd community of practice, looking at how we can make sure that older women around the world are engaged in this initiative using a rights and equity and gender-based approach. And the final thing that I think in terms of tomorrow, which we should be thinking about today, is we have moved now from a fantastic conference in Dublin, and I'd like to acknowledge that success and Anne Connolly in moving that forward, to what is clearly going to be a fantastic conference here in Quebec. But where do we move next? Where is the next conference? And finally, I'd like to leave you with 4 points, slightly more conceptual, to think about over the next 4 days. The first one is about diversity, and diversity is something that permeates everything we do in ageing and everything we do within this network. It's the diversity of older people. On the one hand, you can have a very fit, healthy 75-year-old who can participate in almost anything they want, but you may have a 65-year-old who's much more limited in their capacity to participate. How do we ensure that we provide environments for all of those? but also how do we engage the diversity that's represented in this room? That map that Suzanne showed at the beginning. How can we ensure that we really add up to more than just the sum of those different cultures and different communities? The next point is how do we address equity? Because with that diversity comes gross inequities. Inequities, again, for individual older people who have the physical capacity, the educational capacity, the financial resources to be able to do the things they want, but also many, many older people who have none of the above. And how can we overcome that? What role does the age-friendly city have in achieving the victory over inequity? We also need to be thinking about sustainability. How do we make this movement sustainable? It's exploded beyond our dreams. When we first launched the network in New York, we had no idea it would be this big. And to some extent, we've just been chasing after it, trying to catch up the whole time. And the risk is that it grows so big, it will suddenly implode because we don't have underneath it the infrastructure and the platform that can make sure it can move forward. So how do we think about sustainability and making this something that will last into the middle of this century? And finally, how do we ensure empowerment? The empowerment of older people, because this isn't a movement that's about cities doing something to or for older people. It should be a movement that's about doing things with older people and enabling them to do things for themselves. And I think with those 4 themes, when you go into each of the sessions, I want you to be thinking about how do we make this a more age-friendly world? How do we move from where we are today? How can we bring in all the innovations, all the technological innovations, all the new thinking that is out there? How do we bring it all together into a tangible movement that's sustainable to the middle and hopefully beyond the middle of the 21st century? Thank you.